The consular officer then requested for a marriage certificate, which we gladly presented to her. She carefully looked at the document and handed it back to us. Then she looked at my wife and told her that I'm sorry, but I don't think you'll be allowed to travel with your husband to the US. It's October again, which means another golden chance to try your luck to migrate to the United States of America through applying for the diversity visa via the Dvprogram, which is the simplest door to migrate to the United States. Back in 2013, I tried out my luck in the Dvprogram and won the lottery, but failed during the interview after preparing with very high hopes and spending quite a huge amount of resources. My dreams to migrate to the US were shattered after I failed at the interview at the US Consulate in Nairobi, Kenya. In this video, we will find out what went wrong and cost me and my family the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and also left a deep hole in our pockets. Maybe it's because I was still in the initial stages of trying to bring up a young family, which was shortly after completing my studies. Welcome to the channel and remember to subscribe to support us. And in case you find this information useful, hit the like button so that the video can spread further. The family consisted of my wife and 2 kids, one of which was adopted. We got wind of the program by virtue of an internet business that we had set up, popularly known as a cyber cafe. Clients would come to the shop to make the application, and one of them happened to take us through the steps, upon which we decided to give it a shot. The biggest mistake we did was that we never did enough research to learn more about the requirements that were needed. In fact, I was the only one who did the application, and my wife did not even attempt, since we never thought that we could make separate applications as a couple. The application process was simple and straightforward and would only take a few minutes. The problem is that we did not have some of the requirements at hand, like the passport pictures, but we hurriedly made arrangements and took the photos at a nearby photo studio in what would be our first major expense towards the DV application process. Afterwards, we proceeded with the online application process, upon which we completed filling the forms and submitted. The long wait was over after a few months, and believe it or not, we found out that we were among the successful applicants who had been selected. This was one of the happiest days of my life. From there henceforth, we received communication via a special link that was created and provided to us by the Kentucky Consular Office, guiding us through the rest of the application and preparation process. I hope that you don't mind the noise that you can hear all around me. I'm trying to record this during the day to make out the most out of my free time. Kindly bear with me. This communication was meant to clear any anomalies that might have arisen before or after the initial application and that may derail or interfere with our visa application. This included instructions on how to prepare for and take the medical checkup, as well as the interview, including the amounts to be paid and the modes of payment. We were also required to have our passports ready, which was the next major expense that we incurred, since we did not even have the passports in the first place. We had to make hasty arrangements and get these documents. Remember, we were 4 of us in the beginning, but my wife had later given birth to another child, and we had to get passports for the 5 of us. We had to apply for the passports urgently, since most of the timelines were strict, and there were long queues both at the medical facility as well as the US Consulate in Nairobi, where we were to go for our interviews. Here we did a mistake that cost us even more when we ran into an agent who promised to help us with the passports, only to realize that he was out to make a kill by extorting us even further after we had agreed and even made payments in advance. He further demanded for more cash after the documents had been printed, failure to which he refused to release the documents, and we had to involve the immigration officials who managed to trace the agent, repossessed the documents, and handed them over to us. Mind you, this was 2 days to the medical appointment. We even found out that some of the information was incorrect, but there was no time to rectify. We had to write to the Kentucky Consulate so that they could guide us on how to proceed. This was our first major milestone, but all is well that ends well. We later on made arrangements and went for the checkup and vaccinations, upon which we were issued with a soft copy and another one sent to the Kentucky Consulate, as well as the US Embassy in Nairobi. This is a copy of the results which I still have until now. And here are the 5 passports, including the one for the newborn baby, as you can see. Inside this pack we have this disc, which includes all our medical information as well as the vaccinations that we took. This was the third instance where we spent quite an amount, and you might also want to consider this before you proceed with the application. The green card process is quite a costly affair, and you need to have a good plan on how you're going to finance the process. However, some processes have now been made much easier, and I think you can now even take pictures with your phone, but they still have to meet the required specifications. That's why you need to carefully go through the requirements to avoid making these simple mistakes that might be so costly. Remember that there are also other things like transport which might be so costly, especially if you do not have your own car. In fact, in those days there was no Uber, and you had to engage someone who had a taxi, will take you around and wait for you, and eventually take you back. It was a very expensive mess. I remember that our driver did not even charge us on our way back after the failed interview. Probably because he was there since the beginning of the process when we went for the passport pictures until the last day, which was the day of the interview. Besides, my wife cried a lot and no one spoke a word on our way back after the interview, which was really sad. At the time, my youngest son was only months old. Remember, he was born a few months after the initial application, which further complicated things. Anyway, we would cross every bridge whenever we got there. Finally, our visa interview at the consulate was booked for the 11th of August 2015, which was about 3 weeks after our medical visit. On the day of the interview, we arrived early and waited on the long queue before finally getting in and heading to the reception. The US Embassy in Nairobi is located in a serene environment, away from the hustle and the noisy overcrowded streets of the capital city and its suburbs. This also included some US Army personnel who were patrolling the embassy grounds and a television set broadcasting a US channel, which also showed you a piece of life on the other side. I have never sat down to watch TV and lost track of time and my senses like I did on that day. I can tell you for free that the embassy itself is a piece of the United States. It was so unreal. After waiting for some time at the reception, one of their staff nodded to us and requested us to approach her desk, which was a few feet from where we were sitting. Almost the same distance as a teacher sits in a class, away from the students in the first row. There she requested to take a look at our documents before we proceeded to the interview desk. She went through the birth certificates and the passports, the high school certificates, and also sought more information about this baby who was born after the initial application and made some notes on her computer. She also double-checked our passports and also noted something about the discrepancies in the passports, which she double-checked on the system since we had engaged the consulate earlier regarding the same issue and had the issue sorted out before we went for our medicals at the IOM. Later on, she requested for the adoption decree for the young girl, and this is where the first problem would arise, since you need a decree issued by a judge from a court of law showing that you are legally mandated to adopt a child as a parent or guardian. Mind you, this also applies to parents who adopt children from their other marriages, especially in the case of a father. The legal position is that the mother is well suited to cater for the needs of the child, unless the father has been granted such rights by a court process. When we inquired what this meant, the officer indicated that the interviewing officer will have the last word. She further indicated that the interviewing officer may or may not grant us the visa and allow us to proceed to the US, leaving the child behind, especially because we had indicated that she was our direct dependent and that we were directly responsible for her bringing. Any other arrangement would have required going back to court or leaving my wife back to take care of the girl, neither of which was likely since my wife's soul was now in the US. We also did not have any funds to initiate any court proceedings, since we did not even have any for the flight tickets in case we succeeded at the interview. In fact, we only had enough to pay for the interview, which was already so much, since we had to pay for each one of us about 400 USD for the adults and 200 to 300 USD for the kids depending on their ages. In total, we paid about 1300 to 1500 USD for the interview. And that was back then. This is where I committed the greatest mistake that I still remember during the whole process to this day. The consular officer then requested for a marriage certificate, which we gladly presented to her. She carefully looked at the document and handed it back to us. Then she looked at my wife and told her that I'm sorry, but I don't think you'll be allowed to travel with your husband to the US. My feet felt so heavy and sweat started flowing from my head and my armpits. I could not believe it. After a short silence, I only managed to say the word no. My wife is the one who remembered to ask why. The officer, sensing the desperation, she left us and went to the interviewer's desk, who was now free and waiting for us. All the other applicants on the queue were now keen on our case, and I also remember one lady on the queue who also broke down in tears, as if she had an idea of what was going on. Let me remind you to subscribe in case you are new to the channel, and in case you are finding value in this video, press the like button so that it can spread further. At this point, it was clear that all is not well. After they had consulted, the consular officer then came back to our desk and briefly explained to us that our case had issues, one being the adoption case and now the marriage certificate. She further suggested that we should now consider paying the interview fees for the principal applicant only and pay for the rest afterwards. I think she knew that we stood no chance. This is where we made the biggest mistake, since we went ahead and paid for the full interview for the whole family. Had we taken her advice, we would only have paid about $400 instead of the more than $1,000 that we paid for the full interview. After making the payments, it was time now to go to the interviewer's desk where we presented our case. The interviewing officer took time to carefully look at the documents, followed by some simple questions, after which she explained to us that our case was not successful since we did not meet the requisite adoption and marriage requirements. On the issue of adoption, she explained to us that we needed the adoption decree because there was no way we could be allowed to leave the child behind, since we had already indicated that we were her parents and she was a direct dependent. The only option was to leave one of the parents behind or wait until the child attains the age of 18 years old, where she will now be considered an adult. If not so, the only other option was to go to court and get the adoption decree. On the issue of marriage, we were supposed to have held a legal union way before making the DV application to prove that the marriage was not arranged for the purposes of this application. We tried our best to convince the officer that we were indeed married and that we were living together as a family, but this was not enough. In our case, we held our marriage after making this application, which was not procedural, as you can see from this certificate. This was way after applying for the diversity visa. On that note, our dreams of migrating to the US went up in smoke. However, we were advised to make all the necessary arrangements and try again in the coming years. This was our green card journey, and I urge you to carefully go through the requirements and try to analyze every scenario in case you're planning to proceed with the application. We'll be making a video later about the DV application in this channel. Therefore, make sure to stay tuned and remember to press the notification bell so that you can be notified when the new video is ready.